June 23, 1942. Royal Air Force observers at Pembrey Airfield in South Wales trained their binoculars on an incoming fighter cutting through the clouds in a flawless approach. A German aircraft heading straight for a British airfield should have triggered panic, alarms, gun crews, red alerts, but nothing happened. Something about the pilot's behavior looked deliberate. The Focke-Wulf 190 eased down onto the grass runway as if it belonged there, rolled to a halt near the tower, and its engine wound down to silence. The canopy slid open. A young German officer, Oberleutnant Armin Faber of WW2 climbed out, removed his leather flying helmet, and scanned the airfield. And that's when the shock hit him like a punch. The aircraft parked nearby weren't Messerschmitts. They were Spitfires. The men sprinting toward him weren't wearing Luftwaffe gray. They were in RAF blue. In that instant, Faber realized the truth that British intelligence would soon be celebrating. Germany's most lethal new fighter, the aircraft dominating the skies over France for months, had just been handed over intact to the enemy because one pilot had lost his bearings. The British didn't just capture a plane, they had acquired the key to rewriting the air war. For 8 long months, the Focke-Wulf 190 had been a terror for Allied airmen. It first showed up in September 1941, and from the opening encounters, everyone knew something had changed. RAF squadron leader J.E. Johnson, who would go on to become Britain's top ace, barely lived through his first fight with one. It was simply faster than our Spitfire Mark V, both straight and in the dive. It rolled quicker, and its firepower was ferocious. For the first time in the war, our fighters were completely outclassed. Losses reflected the fear. During the first half of 1942, RAF pilots flying over France were being shot out of the sky in alarming numbers. Even hardened survivors of the Battle of Britain were falling to the mysterious new German fighter with horrifying regularity. The 190 could dive away, reverse direction in an instant, and shred a Spitfire with 20mm cannon shells that tore aircraft to pieces. American pilots newly arriving in Britain learned the warnings immediately. Don't turn with a 190. Don't try to roll with it. Don't follow it into a dive. The instructions sounded like superstitions, a list of things that would get you killed, with almost no advice on what might work. Allied intelligence needed hard technical insights. But every 190 shot down in Britain had either exploded or hit the ground at high speed. No usable wreckage, no measurements, no answers. Then, Armin Faber made a single catastrophic navigational error. Before we go further, I'd love to know where you're watching from and whether you knew this story before. Drop a comment and let me know if detailed historical episodes like this are your thing. And if you appreciate the research that goes into these videos, subscribing to the channel keeps them coming.
Faber was no rookie. At just 21, he had multiple victories and flew with WW2, a prestigious fighter wing. On June 23rd, he was escorting bombers across the Channel when combat broke out with RAF fighters. In the swirling maneuvers, Faber became disoriented. Heavy cloud cover blocked the coastline. A sudden turn during the fight flipped his sense of direction. When he descended and saw farmland and an airfield, it looked exactly like northern France. His sun-based heading reinforced the illusion. He lined up and landed at Pembrey, believing he was touching down on a Luftwaffe base. When he saw the Spitfires, he panicked and tried to restart his engine for takeoff, but RAF ground crews were already on him. Within minutes, he was a prisoner, and Britain had a pristine FW-190A sitting on their runway. At RAF Fighter Command Headquarters, the reaction bordered on celebration. Air Chief Marshal Sholto Douglas immediately ordered the aircraft hauled to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough. Engineers, aerodynamicists, and weapons experts swarmed over it within 2 days, and what they documented explained everything Allies had been suffering. The aircraft wasn't beautiful, it was brutally efficient. The Spitfire was elegance, the 190 was engineered violence. Its BMW 801 radial engine produced 1,700 horsepower, more than the Spitfire Mk5. But that wasn't what made it deadly. The breakthrough was its roll rate. The FW-190 could flick from left to right faster than anything the Allies flew. In a turning dogfight, That meant the German pilot could switch direction, gain firing angles, and lock on target long before the Spitfire could react. British test pilot Captain Eric Winkle Brown flew the captured 190 and summarized it simply. You could throw it around the sky with your fingertips. The Spitfire required technique. The 190 obeyed instantly. The firepower difference was just as staggering. 4 20mm MG-151 cannons and 2 machine guns delivered a devastatingly concentrated burst. A 2-second hit equaled more destructive power than 10 seconds of fire from a Spitfire. And because the guns were mounted close to the fuselage, the shot grouping was brutally tight. Its diving ability explained the endless escapes reported by Allied pilots. The cleaner aerodynamics and heavier weight made the 190 accelerate downward like a missile, leaving pursuers helpless. But Farnborough also uncovered weaknesses, ones that could be weaponized. Above 20,000 feet, the radial engine overheated and lost serious horsepower. Meanwhile, the Spitfire's Merlin thrived in thin air. The FW-190 excelled at snap maneuvers, but in a long, sustained horizontal turn fight, the Spitfire could gradually tighten the circle and win. And at extreme speeds, above 400 miles per hour, the FW-190's control stiffened dramatically. Pulling out of a steep dive required enormous physical strength, leaving the aircraft momentarily vulnerable.
Tactical memos went out immediately to RAF units. But the British did something even bigger. They invited U.S. Army Air Force's test pilots to fly the 190 themselves. In August 1942, the Americans arrived, returned home with first-hand experience, and distributed doctrinal changes across every fighter group preparing for Europe. Major Cass Hoff's report was blunt. Below 20,000 feet, a 190 in expert hands defeats anything we have. Above 25,000 feet, we win. Keep the fight high. Make the Germans follow us upward. That revelation rewrote American escort tactics. When P-47 Thunderbolts entered combat in 1943, they fought at altitude. Bomber escort missions operated high. Fighter sweeps stayed high. Whenever 190s attempted combat, American pilots intentionally climbed, forcing the German fighters into altitudes where their engines wheezed and lost power. The captured FW-190 also influenced Allied aircraft development. American engineers studied its ailerons and upgraded P-47 and P-51 controls for faster roll rates. The 190's weapons layout reshaped thinking about gun concentration. Even its cockpit ergonomics, designed for combat simplicity, influenced later Allied layouts. But the most important effect wasn't technical, it was psychological. Before Faber landed by accident, the FW-190 had a myth of invincibility. After Farnborough's tests, Allied pilots had clarity. It was superb, but not unstoppable. It had strengths and exploitable flaws. And once that intelligence spread, the momentum of the air war began to shift. By late 1943, the scoreboard reversed. P-47s and P-51s hunted German fighters high above Europe. The Spitfire Mark IX arrived, able to compete across the entire performance envelope. German pilots realized their opponents suddenly understood exactly what the 190 could and couldn't do. Famous ace Josef Priller remarked in frustration that American pilots had clearly studied the aircraft. They refuse the rolling scissors. They drag us upward. They have learned. The FW-190 Faber delivered unintentionally remained at Farnborough for years, serving as a benchmark for every new German variant. When the Dora series 190D9 appeared in 1944, Allied engineers immediately compared it to the original captured machine, instantly recognizing the German attempt to fix high-altitude performance. After the war, historians attempted to measure the impact of that accidental landing. The intelligence extracted from the intact 190 influenced fighter training across the RAF and USAAF, altered aircraft design decisions, and shaped combat methods used by thousands of pilots. Captain Eric Brown later described the captured FW-190 as the Rosetta Stone of German fighter technology. It allowed the Allies to decode every advantage the aircraft had, and every weakness that could be turned into a kill. Armin Faber would spend the remainder of the war in a POW camp in Canada. He returned to Germany afterward and lived until 1976. At first, he was blamed for the loss of the aircraft, but later assessments accepted that disorientation and violent cloud-covered combat was not as rare as wartime propaganda suggested. The deeper failure, German intelligence officials later admitted, was assuming an intact 190 would never fall into Allied hands. The larger lesson still echoes in military history. Technological superiority is powerful, but intelligence that reveals how that technology works can be even more decisive. The Focke-Wulf 190 might have remained a phantom terror, claiming Allied pilots through performance and myth. Instead, a single navigational mistake turned it into a handbook of German design philosophy, and the Allies built their tactics around that knowledge. One landing, one confused pilot, one priceless intelligence windfall that shifted the balance of power in Europe's skies. That is how America and Britain obtained Germany's secret fighter, and how a moment of human error reshaped the air war.